Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Brian Smith. Brian is the founder of IA Business Advisors, an international business advisory firm. And he is the founder or current equity holder in over 40 other companies worldwide, representing annualized revenue in excess of $400 million and employing over 1,000 people. Brian's passion is writing, speaking, and his philanthropic work. He's an international best-selling author of the I in Team series, which currently has 2 books, Individual Influence, Finding the I in Team, and Positive Influence, Be the I in Team. And he, as you'll hear in this episode, is working on his 3rd book right now. Brian speaks internationally, primarily on the topics of individual influence and understanding one's responsibility of their influence. That is really what we talk about in this conversation. We define influence, and he's got a very broad definition of what influence is. We talk about how people can harness their influence, how they can find the things in their life that are advantages and put them to good use, influencing their outcomes and better influencing the people around them. Really enjoyed this conversation. I think influence is a really interesting topic that is a lot deeper than most of us might initially think. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I certainly did. Here is Brian Smith. Brian, welcome to the show. Very excited to talk to you today about influence, which I think is an interesting topic. And you not only have written the book on it, you've written 2 books on it. So excited to have you on and talk to you today. Welcome.
Thanks, O'Brien. I'm really glad to be here.
So let's talk about influence. What is influence? How do you define the word influence?
Well, I think for us, influence is any outward or inward feeling we have or change or what makes us who we are, what we do, the words we say to somebody, what happens from those words. When we learn, we're influenced from that education. When we're parented or we're parenting, whatever the outcome of that is influence. Influence can be good or bad. So the definition of influence for us is what comes of our life and what happens in our life, any of our areas of influence, because each of us is so unique and so different.
And how did you come to be an expert in influence, write a book on influence? Why was this something that interested you?
Well, I think, for one, I think about influence a little bit differently than most people do. Influence to us begins before we're born. And I think of it that way. I mean, I've sat and thought about what was influence. And when our parents found out that we were going to be born, that changed their lives, we were influencing them, and we hadn't even taken our first breath. And as I applied that deeper thought about influence to my experiences in implementing technology, doing improvement changes for organizations, dealing with conflict between humans, dealing with conflict between humans and technology, dealing with conflict between organizations and teams, I started to really think about what really is influence and what does it mean to us as individuals, singularly, but also individuals when we come together as groups.
Interesting. And so I like that going all the way back, because you realize like there are implications of the influence that you have that maybe you can't even control. Just you showing up, just you being in a certain place or participating in a certain thing has an influence on the world. And I think we often think of influence as, oh, how do I influence somebody to buy this thing or say yes to this thing or say no to this thing? How do I get somebody to do what I want them to do? But the actual definition of influence, as you've described it, is much broader. It's just really all the impacts, big and small, that we have on the world around us as we navigate through it.
Yeah, I think that what you just described is more persuasion. And I think that's really the clear definition difference between influence and persuasion is that type of influence is getting down to a new degree. And it's where you're actually trying to proactively get somebody to do something, where influence can be, we talk about this story about a person going to literally commit suicide and how a smile from a stranger convinced him not to do that. It changed that person's whole life direction. They were going to kill themselves. That smile from somebody triggered them that, hey, maybe this isn't so bad. And they went off in a different direction. And they told that story about how that simple smile, that's influence. That smile changed their life.
Interesting. And I have heard stories like that before as well. Yeah, I like that. I want to get really introspective now and think about all the different ways I'm influencing people, but we'll save that for after the podcast because dead air would not make for good podcast content. When did you start to get interested in this?
Well, I really started to get interested in it when I started our company. Our company is called IA Business Advisors, but IA stands for Individual Advantages. And back in the 90s, when I started Individual Advantages, it was a think tank. We were analyzing the influence of technology on humans because it was just becoming prevalent on the desktop and was having this dramatic influence on how we reacted, the expectations we had, how we influenced others, how we influenced ourselves, the expectations we put on ourselves now because this new technology was out there. So I really started thinking about influence as a human thought in 1996 when I started the company.
Interesting. So I'm glad you said individual advantages. I knew we were going to get there eventually, but that's one thing I wanted to ask you because you mentioned it in the book as well. What is an individual advantage?
Well, honestly, that's just unique to each individual. In our book, we actually try to redefine what individualism is. And it is our belief that an individual is two distinct things. And by distinct, I mean myself or you or Brian, when we're alone, we are obviously individual. But right now in this moment, you and I together are individual in this effort to bring information, influence, and understanding to your audience. So we are individual together, and that audience becomes individual together as they learn and as they're influenced. Companies are individual. Departments within companies are individual. Countries are individual. States, the counties within them, the cities within the counties. Each can be defined as individual. So for us, individual advantages is about what we bring as that one unit, either alone or together, the advantages we bring into whatever area of influence that we have.
Why is that so important? Like, how did that become a central tenet for you to be thinking about these advantages and what do we do with them? So like, I guess I'm trying to ask a couple questions here, but like, how do we identify our advantages and what do we do with them? Why are they so important?
Well, first off, I think that to be our best for others, you have to be your best self first. And to find those advantages that you have individually, you have to understand self first and what best self means. And I don't mean that from a selfish perspective. So our first book, Individual Influence, Find the I in Team, was about that journey, about finding who you are, what influenced you up until this very point. And by the way, I started as a person when we began this conversation, and I'm already being influenced. There's already change happening. So we're constantly in this influential world. How we take a step back, slow down, and look at that journey that we each take takes some time. But by understanding what influenced you, what you're good at, what you don't like, what you do like, what situations you like to be in, what situations you don't like to be in. And when you start to think in those individual contexts and break that down and put it contextually into your own life, your own area of influence, your advantages start to show up. They just become understood. And then you have to think, okay, well, how do I apply those individual advantages within my particular area of influence? What is it in my particular situation that I could do better, do more of, do less of, listen more of, talk more of, share more of? And that vision, that story, that your influence, your life begins to come about, and it after you go through this process, you learn what your individual advantages really are.
Man, you're teeing up the transitions here. Let's talk about that process, because that's where as you were talking, that's what I was thinking about. And I've done some journaling and gotten some good coaching through my organization, Locked In, and I've talked about it here, and I've actually had a coach that I work with on the show. Most people have not done that kind of work. Most people have not really sat down and gone really deep into themselves and their experiences and what they got from those experiences and the positives that they can make out of all the negative situations that have happened in their lives. And I mean, even I know I could go a lot deeper in the work that I've done. Like it's kind of an endless pool that you can dive into. And a lot of people really just swim at the surface. I think it can be really uncomfortable to go deeper and to be that kind of introspective. So what does the exercise look like to do this? And how do you help people who maybe aren't comfortable start to break this open and get into what their advantages are?
You made a good analogy there, swimming at the surface. When you're swimming at the surface, that's your immediate area of influence. So where you're swimming, that pool that you're in, if you will, understanding that pool, how you got there. And not everybody likes to journal. So journaling might not be the right vehicle for you, but it's pretty easy to sit down with a pen and paper and say, okay, where am I at today? How did I get here? Who did I meet that got me this job? Or who did I meet that introduced me to these people or to this situation? What decisions did I make that put me in this spot? And if that answers your question and identifies, well, look, I'm supposed to be here, you can keep swimming in that pool because that you've satisfied yourself. But if you say, well, why did I listen to that person and not that other person? You got to write down, okay, what happened right before that? What made me listen to John Doe or Jane Doe? And why did I choose A over B? And you're going to have to start to peel the onion layer by layer. And one of the things we talk about in our book is that when you do that, you could get to some points where it's difficult. And when you get to those points, you have to reach out. And if that means you have to reach out to a professional to understand some of the decisions you make, then we would encourage you to do that. If you need to find a peer or somebody you trust to help understand maybe the emotions that you have or become a little bit more objective, because once we get too subjective, things get fuzzy. The emotions get in the way. And when you get to that point, either find somebody that you trust in your area of influence or go hire a professional and get somebody objective to listen and help you to unravel that particular situation. Sometimes it happens in a moment. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes days, weeks, or even years for people to unravel those things. The process isn't about revisiting negativity and trying to come to terms with the negativity. The process is about understanding your immediate area of influence. And if you want to know how you got there and how you can take best advantage of where you're at in this particular time.
Yeah. I like this exercise, and it reminded me of an exercise that I did with the coach that I mentioned. His name's Chet Scott. He runs a company called Built to Lead, and he's been a guest here before. And one of the exercises that he had us do was creating our own builder's journey. It's Built to Lead. We're all builders. And so they call it the builder's journey. And you wound up just essentially writing your life story. And you could go back as far as you want, be as detailed as you want. But the key was, as you went or after you wrote it, you had to go back and say, okay, at all these pivotal moments, what did I learn? What does this tell me about who I am now? What do I believe about the world because of this happening to me? And I like adding the question that you're talking about is, what advantages did I get or what strength did I build because of these experiences and because of this life that I've led up to this point? And I think it was really interesting for me. I like to write, and I like to journal. I think I did like 20 pages or something, but it was really interesting to go back and pull out the lessons and go like, oh yeah, that's why I did that. Or, oh, that's why I now do X, Y, and Z, because back in high school, I stood up for something. And that really taught me that I could stand up for things. And so now I've stood up for all these other things. And it's become part of who I am with each new opportunity I have to strengthen that muscle. So it was interesting to see your exercise so closely parallel that exercise. And I think while we want a lot of things to be proprietary and original, the best things are those things that are true across disciplines and across time. And I think that exercise is a good one.
Yeah, Brian, I think anybody who reads our books, the things that are unique in our book is our interpretation of individualism. Our use of, we believe there's an I in team, and how positive we are about that. But most of the things that we talk about are just tried and true. They're just delivered differently. Everything you just said, I love that. When you journal or when you just write things down, you can see, I call it a clover leaf. When you've made a decision and you come back to the same action, and you made a decision and you come back doing the same thing, even when it's wrong, you find that you've done that over and over again, and you don't actually realize it because you justified bad decisions through your life. So you always justify them, and then you make those same mistakes over until you have a way of understanding it, visualizing it, coming to grips with it. You'll continue to justify those decisions that continually digress or take you on an off ramp in the wrong direction. That's why this exercise, and coaches like myself love this exercise, because it can show you that digression. It can show you those decisions coming back and bringing you back to a point where you keep making bad mistakes over and over again.
Yeah. It's really, to your point, it's really about having tools, whether it's journaling or anything else, that allow you to look at your life through a neutral lens and allow you to really understand what's going on in a way that you can't in the moment with all the emotion and experience that you're having at the time.
Yeah, or other influence. We oftentimes make decisions because we are being influenced by others to go fast. It could be our environment, our work environment, our home environment, our children, our spouse, our coworkers, and they're influencing us to make decisions quickly. And because we make those decisions quickly, we make decisions that take us on an off ramp. So it's why we talk about slowing down and understanding what slowing down means in your life, so that you can be more thoughtful and mindful about the decisions you make.
Yeah. So you teased another good exercise there, which is deciphering which decisions you're making because of outside influence and which decisions you're making because of your own desire. We talk about having a self-authored life, living a self-authored life. A lot of times we go through life making decisions based on the influence of other people, and they don't even have to be in the room, right? You hear your mom's voice in your head saying, successful people don't do that. Or you hear your dad's voice in your head saying, whatever the case might be, some judgment, and it can really influence the way that you make decisions. But having an opportunity to sit down and either talk through or write through or whatever, which of those things are BS and which of those things are true for you can be really powerful as well.
Yeah, I wake up every day, O'Brien, and I have to remind myself this one thing: I am. And what I mean by that is that I am the accumulation of every human I've ever interfaced with. That includes people on screens, when I meet them on the side of the road. I travel a lot, so people I meet every day in different countries, different cultures. I know more every day than I did the day before. I'm influenced by that, no. And we are the accumulation, and we are influenced by others, as you say, oftentimes without even realizing that we were influenced by them. It could be nuances that you picked up in a work study session or at a conference, or working with a particular client, or marrying your spouse. I mean, you just don't know sometimes where they come from. I think that's where some of our biases come from. Unconscious biases, conscious biases, subconscious biases come from those interactions that we sometimes don't even understand.
Yeah. Let's talk about your journaling practice. What does that look like, and how are you doing this kind of reflection for yourself?
I journal every day. I have for 35 years. I have somewhere around 1,200 to 1,300 composition books. In fact, our first book was written out of my daughter getting to read my journals. She just talked about that in an interview about how intimate it was to read my journals. But I journal every day. I wake up every morning, somewhere around 5 a.m., and I journal. Throughout the day, if things happen, I journal. If you came into my office today back in Illinois, you would see somewhere between 15 to 30 composition books just laying around. Each has a different title on them, and I write things in them based on different things that are important to me. And then at the end of the day, I journal for about 10 minutes.
What would the titles on those composition books be?
So one is team. So anything that comes to mind about that happens to me during the day or in a moment about a team. If I'm on the road, I'll speak them into my phone, but as soon as I get back to the office, I'll add them to the team book. Conflict, confusion, emotion, those are really the top ones. If I find myself getting emotional, I'll let myself go through that emotional period. I'll voice memo myself a note, and then when I get back to the office, I'll put it in the emotion. And I try to figure out, why did you have that emotion? What triggered it? Was it something from the past? Was it something in the moment? Was it just you didn't like something that was happening? I want to try to understand those things about myself. I go pretty deep to journaling, way deeper than most people do. Just having a simple journal is also helpful.
So let's talk about your morning and evening journals then. What are you writing? I think that's something that a lot of struggle with. I mean, I journal a lot, and I know I struggle with that sometimes. As I sit down, I'm just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be writing about right now.
I don't think you're supposed, my opinion is you're not supposed to be writing anything in particular. If you read my journals, sometimes they're nonsensical. You used the word earlier, word salad. A lot of my journals are just word salad. I just write what's ever in my mind. Sometimes I had dreams that I remember. I wish I remembered them more. I'll write about those dreams. Sometimes Renee and I, my wife and I, will have had a conversation the night before, and I kind of unpack it again. Sometimes I had a conversation with one of my children. I'll unpack it again. At the end of the day, however, it's always just about my day. And it's usually, I talked to these people today. If somebody gave me a certain emotion, or I felt like I had unfinished business with them, I'll write myself a note. I had a good day. It's little things like that. It's written in a lot of bullet points. I don't put little points there, but it's written in simple sentences. I saw these people. We talked about these topics. That person really upset me, or I really enjoyed my conversation with that person. I wish I'd spend more time with them. Here are some unanswered questions I had from the day, and I just put them in there. And then I go back and look at those on a regular basis.
That was going to be my next question is what do you do with it? Is it just there to get out of your head, or, how do you review it? So it sounds like you review it. Is there a special cadence to that, or just is it whenever you feel like it?
I try to look at them every week. Sometimes they stack up a little bit longer depending on my travel schedule and everything else. But I try to look at my journals every week. When I get through a journal and I know I've reread a whole journal, it goes into a box. That's the ones that Mary can pull out. She starts toying with them. She'll start asking me questions about what happened. Why did you write this? What did you mean when this happened? Can you remember this emotion? Can you remember this person? And that's how we start to develop content for our blogs, for our articles, for our own podcast, and for our books.
That's fantastic. I won't guess. I'll ask you, has it changed your writing at all, knowing that your daughter's going to be reading it?
No, not at all. Well, I thought it might, but she was so objective about reading that first time around. She actually talks about this in our first book, in her foreword. She talks about it in interviews she's done. She is so objective about it. And our relationship, when it comes to the work that we do here, is pretty emotional for us. Our feelings about influence and how influence is our biggest responsibility as humans, goes to that influence we have with each other. So she works hard and I work hard not to allow that to get in the way of our ability to read each other, work with each other when it's in this context.
Yeah, I like that. I think about that because I keep the journals that I have as well. And I do have the thought that, maybe someday one of my two boys will want to go through and see what their crazy dad was thinking at some point. But I wonder, am I then allowed to be really honest with myself about how I feel and what I want and what my biggest weaknesses are? And I try to be, but I've definitely wrestled with that a few times.
Yeah, it takes being honest with the person that you allow to read them also, which means warning them ahead of time that, look, there might be things in my journal that are a little disturbing to you because they were written for me. And now that I'm allowing you to read them, you might read things and go, wow, I never knew he thought that or felt that way or even had that emotion towards himself, others. Or there's been a situation where Renee has read it and I just wrote how frustrated I was with our relationship. We've been married 31 years this year. So we have a great relationship, but it was still a little shocking to her. Luckily, she knew that ahead of time. So if you are ever going to let somebody read your journal, just warn them ahead of time.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's good advice. What have you gained from journaling?
Oh, wow. I know so much more about myself and the people that I put in my area of influence and that I keep.
How does that change you day to day, though? Because I think it's one thing to say, oh, I know a lot more about myself. But to somebody who's like, yeah, but I need some ROI from this. Like, what types of things have you seen in your life that have come? What are the benefits? Do you have any stories or anything?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you asked. So, I'm writing book 3. That's actually where I'm at right now, is up in the mountains in Colorado, writing book 3, which is how to build the I in team. And I just went through this exercise and it's taught me empathy because I didn't always have empathy. So as I unpack stories, for example, back in the late 90s, I had partners in my primary company, and then we invested in another company. And it was all around the 9/11 time. And I was very arrogant. I was also very focused on my area of influence. And there was a lot of turmoil in the world. There was a lot of turmoil within our organization. And I justified my aggressive, arrogant leadership style to the detriment of my partners. As I started to read my journals from back then and unpack it, I learned how I was treating them. And I learned that had I been more empathetic to what they were going through, more empathetic to what our team was going through, I would have stopped self-justifying my own actions. And by them, I mean the entire team. I would try to individualize them to try to self-justify, to build that sphere of influence around myself, to make myself feel better about decisions. And it was backfiring. It ended up breaking up this partnership. It also ended up breaking up friendships. And I write about these in our books because if I have regret, and I do, but I don't dwell on it. But if I was to ever dwell on, the only regrets that I have are those 2 relationships. I still unpack that because it's such a powerful lesson, but it's taught me empathy. Mary talks about this also, about how she learned empathy going through this same type of review cycle. And it's hard. Empathy it's not taught. It's learned.
Yeah.
And it's learned by understanding actions of self versus your interactions with others. Those are hard lessons to learn. And I think in journaling, it's been the most powerful lesson I've learned.
That's great. Thank you. I think, one other tangible thing that's come from your journals is soon to be 3 books. That's not to be overlooked either. Not to say everybody can turn their journals into bestsellers, but that is a benefit that has come for you.
Yeah, personally, I think everybody should write a book. I think every book could be a bestseller because I think every human's life is amazingly important. We teach that everybody matters. I think if people slow down and read 1 to many of those a year, that they would find their life more fulfilled by learning about other people's lives and what that meant. And I don't care if you dig ditches cook food or run countries. Your life is interesting, and people deserve or should have an opportunity to learn from those lives.
One thing that you said triggered a thought that I've had for a while. I worked with a guy who was, we'll call him rough around the edges. I was talking with him about style and delivery one time, and he kind of shook me off and said, well, that's not me. I need to be authentic to who I am. And what I wanted to say was, well, who you are sucks, and you need to try to be a little bit better. But I didn't say that. But I think there's something there, right? Like there's an element of, yes, we all want to be authentic to who we are, and we don't want to feel like we have to behave in a way that is inauthentic. And at the same time, as you just pointed out with your story, there are things that you're doing authentically that are causing you and others distress and could turn into regrets later on. And so there's some value to leveling up. How do you think about that topic as listeners, maybe go through these exercises and try to figure out who they are and how to improve and how to live more self-authored lives? What advice do you have for people on how to walk that balance between improving themselves and staying authentic?
Yeah, so obviously, like you just pointed out, I thought I was being authentic, and I'm sure that person does too. These slow down self-reflection moments that we talk about in our first book and in our second book are the real path there. When you listen to learn, that's a takeaway that everybody should have. If somebody tells you that you're being a jerk, you should ask, well, why does this person interpret my actions as being a jerk? I'm being authentic. And you should ask yourself, well, is my authentic self a jerk? And what does that mean? In context, what does that mean? And that's where you start peeling the onion and asking questions of people you trust. What specifically about my body language, about my words, about my tone, about my philosophies, about what I think makes me a jerk? And then you have to listen to learn. And we either learn from that or we self-justify and we go back to being a jerk. I believe these exercises over time, especially if people are being authentic with us or are giving us feedback that we can listen to that's honest, once you see that common reply, you said that, and then somebody else says that, as soon as two people tell me something that is consistent with two different perspectives, my ears perk up, my inner spidey senses go up, and I'm like, okay, two people have now identified a trait that I should start to pay attention to. And then I dive into that trait and try to figure out why two very different people are giving me the same perception.
Yeah, I like that. I have tried to do something similar. I've talked about it on here before, where anytime I get triggered negatively, feel a negative emotion towards somebody else or about a situation, I try to think, what about this is my fault, or what about this is part of me? And that's probably the hardest exercise I've ever done. And I just think it's so hard for people to admit the view they have of themselves is wrong, and that there is actually something negative to who they are and to their personality. And not to say they can't change it. I think we all can work on and change those things, as you talked about building empathy. And I'm sure your relationships are much better now because of the two that wound up being ruined because of your behavior. We can change and do that. But I have found that is probably the most painful thing that I've done. And I've seen it in other people, either from them going through it or refusing to go through it because they just can't admit to themselves that there's something negative within them.
There's a great book out there, Leadership and Self-Discipline by the Arbinger Group, that dives into self-justification in a way that I read that book every year. Everybody in our company reads that book every year. It's mandatory reading. And it's because it does.
The title again, Leadership and
Self-Deception.
Self-Deception. Okay.
Yes. And it's written by the Arbinger Group. it dives into, and it tells a story. It's not written like a self-help book. In other words, a traditional self-help book. It's written,
The parable. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And it really drives home. And then the follow-up book to that is The Anatomy of Peace. And those two books are required reading for our team.
What's The Anatomy of Peace about?
Well, The Anatomy of Peace picks up. It's like a prelude to leadership and self-deception. It takes you back into this character's life when he was a jerk, quite literally when he was a jerk, and it walks you through his life as he was a jerk and as people identified to him his jerk behavior and what shocked him out of that and what pivoted him towards this new self-understanding and this ability to be this new human that has this new positive influence going forward.
Interesting. I like that. And I like those types of parable books. I've some of the best business and leadership books I've read are structured that way.
Yeah, the ones that have stories, O'Brien, and our book is about stories. Our books are about things that happened in my life and in my company's lives. And every lesson in our book, we try to use stories from my life to bring context. And not in a way to say this is the way things should be, in a way that people can read them and apply that context to their own area of influence and try to find a small bridge that helps them to have better understanding.
All right. Well, I appreciate that book recommendation. I just added it to my Goodreads account, and I just finished a book last night and am due for another one. So that looks like a quick read. So I'll add that one to the list.
That's good.
One of the things I want to circle back to the conversation around advantages. One of the questions that I had as I was reading the book is, advantages sounds like privileges. And there's a lot of negative connotation today around people having privilege. I just was curious, do you think of them as the same thing? Or, what distinctions would you make between those two words? And I don't want to we don't need to get political or anything like that, but I just think privilege is a very charged word today. And I think advantages is kind of in the same vein. And so I think I just would love to get your take on kind of the difference or similarity between those two concepts.
Well, I think privilege is something that is given to you. Advantages can be given to you, but more in context of how we look at advantages, they're generally created. Privilege can come from birth for some people.
Yeah.
But not all privileges are good. All advantages should be good. So just because you're privileged and you have money doesn't mean that that's an advantage. That could be a disadvantage. We talk about this in the book, how somebody with money could end up going off and doing drugs, being pretentious, having poor behavior, where advantages are usually, I think of them and we talk about them in a more positive context, that advantages are things that are meant to be taken advantage of, not just for the best self, but also for your best self for others. That's the differentiation I think we try to make.
Well, and to your point, advantages can come out of every situation. Good, you can be born with a lot of money and you can turn that into a great advantage, or that can be a disadvantage if it creates a bunch of other behaviors. Similarly, you could be born into poverty and that could create a ton of advantages for you because of the character you develop, the skill set you develop to pull yourself out of that, the resilience that you have, like creativity in your environment. There's all these advantages that can come out of that, but there's also a lot of disadvantages that can come out of that if you allow yourself to go a certain way too. So I like thinking of it that way because I just find it to be empowering that no matter what situation you face, you can either use it to your advantage or not.
Yeah, I think we talk about the advantage of poverty and with the right mindset, you can take any situation and turn it into an advantage. But it does take mindset. It does take willpower. It does take slowing down, understanding the influence that got you into this disadvantage and what influence it will take to get you out of this disadvantage. And that includes that willpower that we need to move through all of the negative challenges that you're going to have, all of the people who will tell you you can't, all of the situations that are going to become roadblocks. And if you really believe in it and you really think it's an advantage, you just have to keep going. We just think people can do that.
So you said something before, and I don't remember the exact words you used, but I've used this sentence a lot. You can't lead others farther than you've led yourself. And, you talked about how you have to take responsibility for yourself first. How do we build accountability to ourselves?
Yeah, well, you have to be honest to yourself first about who you are, who you want to be, and then you have to reconcile the differences between who you are and who you want to be. And when you make a mistake, you have to hold yourself accountable to it. What does that mean? I don't know, because every mistake has its own context. You could get extreme. If you steal from somebody, do you turn yourself in? That would be the ultimate accountability. So you have to decide that. You have to decide that individually. Humans know right from wrong. Even the ones who self-justify poor behavior still know right from wrong. They're just self-justifying to get over the emotions that they feel, the insecurities that they have, the persuasion they want to follow through on. But it all goes back to humans still know the difference between right and wrong. So accountability is very individual. In the team environment, accountability should be identified up front. Policy, procedure, expectation. We teach these things in our organization and as we advise our clients. If you want to have accountability, you better teach everybody in your organization what that means. So set the proper expectations and then set the proper expectation about what will happen when failure happens. That's where accountability comes from.
What does that sound like or look like within your organization, in your team?
We work in the world of SMART. So our processes within our organization is called SMART management, which comes from the SMART goal setting concept, which is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. When we give instructions, when we write policy documents, when we delegate to them, if we're not smart about it, accountability falls back on the person who failed SMART. And we go through this exercise of understanding where we go to root cause. And when we get to root cause, we determine what it will take to solve so that issue doesn't happen again. And we literally just walk through the problem and we try to correct from the root cause understanding if it's with that person, if it's with a policy, if it's with a procedure. So if a person makes a mistake, we try to find out why they made the mistake. If that means that they require more training, they get more training. If it means they need to have more understanding of the policy, we get them better understanding of the policy. If it means that we take away something from them until they build up the ability to be smart again, then we take that away from them. And when you come into our organization, you understand that this is the process you're going to go for. It takes a person 3 to 6 months to acclimate to our way of doing SMART management. We have a new partner that I just brought on. He started in January. He is still to this day acclimating to our SMART environment, learning about what accountability means, learning about what real delegation is, learning about what our areas of influence are as we define them, and how he can then turn around and advise them and portray that out to our area of influence, which is our client and our teams.
What are the biggest differences that he's found, if you can speak to it, between your method and what would be, more genuinely found in companies?
Well, I think that we're more thoughtful and that our application of thoughtfulness isn't as slow and disrupting as people think it would be. When I tell people that I go through SMART in my head as I'm working with a client all the time, they push back immediately. I mean, really, you think about specifics, measurability, attainability, realistic, and timeliness all the time? Yeah. Takes me like 3 or 5 seconds to apply that to a problem. And when I identify that there's something not specific, I just address it. Well, we don't do that. Well, and that's why you have to revisit your mistakes over and over and over again. So you're either going to take the time up front or you're going to take the time on the backside. That's the thing that he's getting used to, is that we spend more time up front and a lot less time on the back end. We don't have a lot of conflict. We don't have a lot of mistakes. We don't have a lot of confusion. And our clients don't have any of those things. And where he comes from, there's a lot of follow-up. There's a lot of need to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There's a lot of need to schedule 4 or 5 meetings till you get to milestone A. For us, there's 2 meetings to get to milestone A. So because we put so much up front and we're so literal or specific.
I like that. Yeah. I've had people on here and we're talking about clarity and specificity as well, and just the importance that can be and how you can use that as a superpower. So that makes sense to me. I think we could all be more clear. This has been a great conversation. I know we're getting to the end of time here. A couple questions that I ask a lot of people at the end of our conversations. What are you sick of talking about these days?
Yeah. You know what? Really, I'm sick of talking about influencers as a job. I really feel like that's not a job. Your job is not an influencer. If your job is to be a life coach, then you're a life coach. And if you have influence within that, okay, but call yourself a life coach. But don't try to make yourself all-knowing by just saying that you're an influencer. And we get this now. Athletes are influencers and they pipe in on everything from politics to how you should raise your children. What gets me today is, because they're labeled an influencer, is that a person without children can be setting examples for people to raise their children when they've never raised a child on their own. Yet people will listen to them because they are quote unquote an influencer. That's what I'm sick of.
Okay. What are you most excited to be talking about these days?
I am most excited to talk about the power of individual influence and what it means to each person within their specific sphere of influence, and convincing or influencing as many people as we can that they're important and that their number one responsibility is that influence, whatever it is, whatever area of influence you live in. That's your responsibility. That's your responsibility to make it the most positive influence you can in every instance. So I will probably continue with that for the foreseeable future, because I think it's going to take a long time to get this message out that everybody matters. I think we all want to believe that. I think there's a lot of us that would love for that to happen, but convincing people that they're important is really hard, and it shouldn't be this hard, because I think inherently everybody should understand how important they are, because they are. And nothing in life happens without others. I'm not who I am today without a whole bunch of other people.
I love that. I love that. Well, that makes me excited to ask you this final question, which is, what in your mind is the purpose of business?
Wow. Well, I mean, the purpose of business is to fulfill whatever area of influence that business is. If it's a plumber, so plumbing business, it's to plumb. It's to solve people's plumbing problems. If you want to expand deeper than that, the purpose of building your business is building a place where people can exercise their area of influence, where we'll use plumbers. More plumbers can come and feel secure in doing their plumbing work without having to worry about maybe all the other things that go on around them. They can just go do their plumbing work. If it's computer programming, that business is designed to employ programmers to create programs for other people. The purpose of business is to solve human problems and to move humans forward in the best way they can in whatever area of influence that is. And it doesn't matter what that is. The ditch diggers that help our roads and put our infrastructure in, to restaurant people, to executives. The purpose of all of those businesses to take us forward. And we just need to do it with the most responsible influence that we can.
I love that. I like getting everybody's different perspectives on that, especially after we've just been talking about influence for so long, and your great speech there about everybody being important. So I was curious what you would say. I like the answer. Well, thank you, Brian, for this conversation. This has been a ton of fun. I would encourage anybody who's still listening, who's interested, to check out your website, check out your company, check out the work you're doing, check out the books that you've written. We'll link to all of that in the show notes, and to reach out if they want to continue the conversation or engage you in this type of work. So anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, Brian, just, thanks for allowing us to be on your show and to have this brief moment of positive influence for everybody who gets to listen.
Glad we could do it. And thanks for coming on. And thanks everybody for listening.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.